Alright guys, BLM here back with a new video, and in this video we're starting off a bit of a series here where, obviously, as I've been doing over the last few months, I've been updating a lot of my videos that I did 5 years ago when I first started the channel. So where this video will be kind of no difference, where here we'll be redoing some of my old casting videos, which was something I didn't initially intend on doing. I'll be honest, I've kind of gotten over doing many of these casting videos. However, I do think an interesting twist to add to this is the fact that, obviously, that now we're in the lead up to Survivor 50, with it being confirmed way earlier than I was actually expecting it to be. I kind of realized I think it adds an interesting twist to these casting videos. The fact that I can redo these older casting videos now under the guise that they are Survivor 50. So that is what we're going to be doing here, where here I'll be redoing my first ever casting video, that being casting Survivor Legends, which, again, straight up, I don't think Survivor 50 will be a Legend season. I think it's very unlikely to be that, even though I do think some recent interviews from Jeff have implied that he does want to get some older players to kind of embrace the show's history. I don't think we're going to get a full-on Legend season. So just straight up, I don't think many of the Legends would even accept coming back at this point. However, here we will be putting together a cast that I think they will at least claim will be a Legends season using the current parameters. Again, people that would accept going on 50, along with the fact that these being people that production themselves would actually want, and also, obviously, we have to fit into the diversity mandate, which is obviously the standard for recent Survivor casts. Where through that, again, we add this different dynamic to what I did in my original video, which, again, considering the fact that we're doing this 8 seasons later, and again, with all these modern parameters, I think it makes this cast radically different than what it used to be. But straight up, the cast I put together here is not the cast that I would want for Survivor Legends. I don't even think a good chunk of these people on this cast are actual legends of Survivor at this point. But again, more so this is an experiment of if Survivor themselves were forced by CBS to make a quote-unquote legend season, this is essentially who I think would reasonably make it on. So again, this is a semi-realistic cast here, and with that, let's get into the cast itself, to where, again, we'll be running through each season of the show, talking about people that I think could be contenders for this season. And I should mention that this will only be including players up to Survivor 46, as obviously, that's all we have to work with here, to where, while obviously by the time of 50, they would take into consideration 47, 48, 49, and all we have to work with here is up to 46, so again, that'll be the people we include. So with that, let's start off with Survivor Borneo, where this is actually a tough position here in a sense that I think production would very much want to have a Borneo person on a Legend season, obviously, to fully celebrate the history of the series. The problem is that I don't feel like many of the people from Borneo are that likely to be cast in the modern day. Obviously, Richard Hatch is someone that should be a guaranteed person on a Legend season, yet obviously he's pretty persona non grata from the US production side of things, where I don't think he would be put on. I don't think they have an interest in Kelly Wigglesworth. I think Pauline is someone that would fit the bill, but not someone that would probably say yes. Greg is someone that I think would be in the conversation, considering he seemed to be willing to play at the time of Cambodia. Yeah, again, I just don't feel like it's particularly likely here. And even for some other previous returning players, from the likes of Jervis and Jenna, I just feel like there's other people they would rather see more than them. To where, again, technically I could have probably fit someone like Jervis on this cast to up the legendary status of this cast, but I just feel like genuinely, I don't know if anyone from Borneo would make a modern returnee season where they just have so many other people to pick from. For a while, I feel like Jervis is someone that could definitely be in the conversation. I did end up going with a certain other person over him, so he didn't make the cut. Next up for Australia and Outback, and again, like Borneo, I think they would want someone from Australia and Outback. Really, I think they would want at least one person from either of these seasons. I think to them, obviously, these are the two most iconic seasons, the two seasons that had the biggest audience, to where if they can't get someone from Borneo, I think they would definitely want someone from Australia and Outback. And I did add one person from Australia and Outback on this cast. Now, people that did not make it on, I did not put on Tina. I very much considered her, obviously, the winner of the season. And she's someone that is willing to play again. However, again, if she wasn't picked for Survivor 40, I don't know if she's being picked for this season here. I didn't go with Colby. Colby was definitely in consideration for me, especially considering the person I did put on the cast, but considering the fact that Colby pretty openly talks about how much Jeff didn't like him at the time of Heroes vs. Villains, and while I think that could be retracted by now, I just feel like it makes more sense if he doesn't make the cast here. But the person I did put on is Jerry, who is obviously the original villainess of the show, and that's obviously iconic to the show, to where, again, I think if they were to go from someone very early on, I think she is someone that certainly stands stands out. So I think of the realistic picks from the first 2 seasons, I think she's probably the most iconic of the bunch. And also, from what I understand, again, she's still willing to play again. To be honest, I'm not like 100% sure on production's overall view of her, but again, for a legend season, where again, I think they'll put at least one person from the first 2 seasons, I do, considering how iconic of a figure she is and how seemingly willing to play again that she is, I do feel like she was a pretty easy pick here. Next up for Australia and Outback, I mean, really the only people I think would be in consideration from the season for a season like this are the big 3 in Ethan, Lex, and Tom, and I did not put any of them on. I mean, I think Ethan is someone that's very clearly just doesn't want to play again. He's kind of over it. Lex, I think, is willing to play again and was in consideration, though again, I don't get a great sense of how production looks at Lex nowadays. And Big Tom is just someone that I don't think probably gets cast in Modern Survivor, to where again, I didn't end up putting any of them on. Next up for Marquesas, and here I do think we got a few contenders. Now, the very obvious person from this season is obviously Boston Rob, who I didn't put in this cast. Now, I mean, technically, if they offered him enough money, I do think there's definitely a world where Rob would say yes. However, I mean, looking at all of Rob's recent interviews, he does seem kind of dismissive of going back to Survivor US. Not because he doesn't really want to play, but more so because he doesn't think he'll be given a fair shot, and I don't think that'll be any different here. So I just decided to leave him off. Outside of that, I mean, you got someone like a Kathy, who's obviously a legendary figure. Did not put her on the cast. However, 2 people that I do think would be in consideration now that probably wouldn't have been in consideration like 10 years ago for a diversity mandate are Sean Rector, who again would be really cool to see, and Vesepia, who I think would also be really interesting to see. However, I didn't put either of them on. I think Vesepia is obviously the one that is a bit closer to making the cut here. I mean, she's someone that does want to play again, someone that is not particularly well liked by production, but I think now, again, after Black Lives Matter movement, also her being the first ever Black winner, I do think there is, again, some interest here for a legend season. Where, again, both of them were involved in the push to make the diversity mandate happen, where, again, I think they could be in the consideration, but again, I didn't put either of them on here. Next up from Thailand, and I mean, come on. The only person in consideration would be someone like Sheehan, but even then, I don't think she makes the cut. It's not really worth expanding on. Next up from Amazon, and really the only contenders here, I think, are the 2 people that have come back in the past. I mean, Jen Maraska would probably be in consideration as, again, a winner of the show. However, again, the fact that she was on Winners at War, which I don't believe she was even in the casting process, again, not a good sign for 50. However, I do think Rob Cesternino would be a deep consideration here. Under the right circumstances, he would probably do it, but again, I think just considering how unlikely that is to happen, I just decided to leave him off the cast. Next up for Survivor Pro Islands, and here we definitely had some considerations, to where obviously here we have a big 3 as well. We have Sandra, we have Fair Play, we have Rupert. Now, Aussie Fair Play is probably persona non grata still, even though I do think Jeff is a lot more lenient on Fair Play nowadays. I still feel like he probably wouldn't cast Fair Play on a modern season, though I do think it's more likely now than what it used to be, but again, I don't think he makes the cut. Rupert is someone that I really wanted to put on here, however, just after like laying out the cast, and again, I just didn't feel like he fit, which is a shame considering, again, at the end of the day, while this is again a quote-unquote legend season, it's not actually going to be a legend season if they were to make it. It's definitely going to include a lot more recent people. Now, obviously, probably only the most high profile of the more recent players, but through that, obviously, doesn't leave enough spots for these older legends for them to come back, to where, again, I just feel like Rupert is kind of the consequence of that, to where I just don't think he makes it. But the person I did put on the cast is a question mark, but I decided to go with it anyway, and that person is Sandra Diaz-Twine. And again, Sandra has openly expressed recently that she doesn't have much of an interest in playing Survivor again, and again, I do believe it for the most part. I think Sandra's done what she is going to do. I think for her, there's not much of a point in actually playing the game again. However, I do think Sandra would say yes if she was offered enough money. Sure, while I think she would probably rather do other shows than Survivor US at this point, I do feel like she still is someone that production would obviously want. I mean, she is a massive legend of the game, 2-time winner. And again, I think if they give her an enticing offer, I think she would say yes. So again, I decided screw it. Let's put it on the cast here. Next up, from Vanuatu, we got some considerations here. Though straight up, none of them made the cut. I think Amy would have been a cool pick for this season, though straight up, I don't know how on production's radar she is at this point, where she didn't make the cut. Eliza is someone that I do think she would be probably in the conversation, where I think she's someone that's a bit more remembered from a more modern production point of view, but I still don't feel like she makes the cut here. I also think they would consider Twyla, considering Twyla is someone that we know has been in the casting pool numerous times after her original season, where again, I think she would be in the conversation, though I don't think she would make the cut. And also, again, I think someone to bring up here is Chris Doherty. Straight up, I don't think he would make the cut. Obviously, again, he wasn't considered for 40. So while I think Jeff has, again, softened his opinion on Chris over time, I don't think he makes the cut still. Next, I'm moving on to Palau. And I did put one person from Palau on the cast here, though, again, there are obviously considerations. We got Tom Westman, who is someone that, straight up, I thought he would be a lock on any sort of big returnee season if he wanted it. So again, like I thought coming in the Winners at War, he wasn't on it because he said no, as he had talked openly about not wanting to play Survivor again. Yeah, he's actually revealed since then that he actually wanted to play and just wasn't contacted, to where I think that's actually kind of insane, to where considering that fact, again, I didn't put him on the cast here. Yeah, if that news hadn't come out, he probably would have been in consideration here. Also, again, you got someone like an Ian who, again, I think you could definitely question if he's a legend. However, I do think production would want to bring Ian back, to where I think he would at least be in the conversation, though again, I think Ian would more than likely say no. However, the person I did put back here ends up being Stephanie LaGrossa. And again, like Stephanie's been all over the place recently. She's been on a lot of other random shows, and I do think she is someone that does want to play Survivor again. So again, for a legend season, I think she is pretty much a shoe-in here. Just kind of an easy person to put on the cast. Someone that wants to play again. Someone that is a big name for the show. Again, I think it's a pretty lock pick. Next up for Guatemala, and again, no one's really in consideration anymore. Danny's really the only person here that would even be talked about. Yeah, again, after her Winners at War appearance, I don't know if they're dying to bring Danny back, to where, again, pretty easy no here. Next up for Panama, and here I did put a person on the cast. Again, a lot of considerations. Or, again, Aris is someone that would be talked about, though I don't think he would want to play again. Danielle De Lorenzo is someone that's been in the casting pool recently. Yeah, I also don't feel like she would make the cut. Terry Dietz is someone that I would actually personally want to see on this cast. Yeah, I do feel like it's just kind of tough fitting you into this cast, which I mean, just straight up, when it comes to diversity mandate with a cast like this, I mean, obviously, considering how prominent white men have been on Survivor in the early days, a lot of the legendary figures are white men, to where it becomes tough to fit all those white men on the cast, where, again, it ends up being a very strict pool from the white men side of things, to where, again, Terry didn't make it on. The person I did put on, though, is Suri. And, again, just a lock. I mean, it's pretty obvious that Suri would be on a cast like this, genuinely on the upcoming Survivor 50. I think Suri is someone that is definitely very probable there, to where, again, Suri openly talks about her being very willing to play Survivor US again, and considering the fact that obviously production loves her, and again, she helps with diversity mandate, and she's also from an older season. Again, I think just everything is there to make Suri a pretty lock pick for a legend season. Next up from Cook Islands, and obviously Cook Islands has a lot of legends here to consider. Only one of them ended up making my cut. Now, the considerations, I did actually consider Candace, to where, again, I do think as a whole, they would pretty much struggle with getting a lot of these like really massive names, to where I think Candace is someone that's kind of like legendary enough to be in the pool here. Yeah, I don't feel like she would actually make the final cut. Obviously, you gotta consider Penner, who, again, is someone that I also would very much want on this cast. Yeah, I also think struggles to make the cut. Parvati is obviously a lock if she wants it. However, I do think she would say no. She's been very open. The fact that she has no interest in playing Survivor US again. And again, I think it's just an easy no for this. However, a major consideration that I very much debated on was Ozzy, who, again, I decided on no, simply because, again, I feel like there's enough other people like similar-ish to him archetype-wise where they would take his spot. And along with that, again, like production has not been particularly high on Ozzy recently, to where we know at the time of Game Changers that Jeff openly said that he actually did not want Ozzy on the cast, and it was CBS that forced him into doing so, to where, again, maybe it would be the same situation if CBS forced him to put Ozzy on again. But considering the fact that Jeff is not seemingly that pro Ozzy in the modern day, I don't feel like he makes the cut. So the person I did put on from this cast is actually the winner of the season, that is Yul Kwon. And again, Yul obviously is legendary enough to be on a legend season. However, beyond that, I think is also someone that Jeff has talked pretty favorably in the modern day. Now, straight up, the actuality of whether or not he would play again is a little bit up for grabs, where Yul has said in the past that he would only play again if it was for charity, as he thinks he'll just be targeted right away because now everyone knows that he's going to play for charity after Winners at War. Though I don't really take that for face value personally. I feel like that's just a position where he's saying that without the real offer in front of him, to where I do think if he was given an offer to actually be on the show, I do think he would take it. I mean, it feels very clear from like listening to him talk about the game that he does still have that itch to play the game. While I do think, again, there definitely is like some like boss Boston Rob mentality there, that he just feels like he's not going to be in a good position even if he comes back. I do feel like he is more likely in my mind. So as a whole, I do think if there is a legend season and Yul is not busy at the time, I do look at Yul as a somewhat likely returnee there. Next is for Fiji, and I mean really there's only one true consideration for Fiji, where Fiji obviously is a mostly forgotten season at this point, where while Yao Man was obviously the biggest character at the time, I don't think he would even be on their radars anymore. However, the person I do think they would consider, I did put him on the cast, that person is Earl Cole. Now again, Earl is in this interesting spot to where obviously he's the winner that was on the show so long ago, hasn't returned since then. However, despite that, he's been in the running for a lot of the recent seasons. Again, we know that he was almost on the cast of Survivor Game Changers. He was also contacted for 40 and had to drop out due to him expecting a child, where again, I think Earl is someone that is definitely on production's radars. I mean, we even got this like really out of the blue reference to him in 43, to where, and I think he's definitely on Survivor's radars. Now, again, is he legendary enough, as if is he a big enough name to really promote on the show? I don't know. However, again, he's obviously still a winner of the show. He is also the first black male to win the show. He, again, seems willing to play again if the timing is right. And again, seems to be in favor of production at this point, to where, again, I think he's a pretty easy pick for me. So the only question mark was, again, are there enough spots on the cast? Where, again, for me, it was the debate between Jervis or Earl, to where, while Jervis is someone that's probably a bit more iconic, I did feel like Earl was, again, in the casting pool more often than Jervis, to where, again, Earl made the cut for me. Next up for Survivor China, and sadly no one made the cut for China despite there being a lot of considerations. Obviously Todd Herzog is someone I would really like to see. Yeah, again, seems to be off production's radars at this point. Courtney Yates is obviously a legendary character. Yeah, I don't think she was ever particularly loved by production, especially at this point. It's been far removed from her original season to where I don't think she makes it on. Amanda Kimmel is also someone I would be very interested in seeing in the modern day. Yeah, also someone that I don't know if they have their radars on her, and even then, who knows if she would actually say yes, considering her conflicting messages, to where I decided to leave her off. And honestly, I would very much consider James. Yeah, James is another one. Don't fully know if he would say yes or no, and even then, it seems like they've mostly forgotten him in the modern day, where like you don't really hear anything about James being in the casting pool post Heroes vs. Villains, to where, again, I just decided to leave all of them off the cast here. Next up for Micronesia, where, again, from the fan side of things, I think you got a couple considerations. Neither of them made the cut for me, though. Eric Reichenbach, obviously a massive legendary figure, and the fact that he gave up his necklace and covered it afterwards. And again, I don't think he would make the cut here. I don't think they were particularly happy with him after Karamoan, where, again, I don't think he makes it on. The other person to consider would be Natalie Bolton, obviously someone that has been in the casting pool numerously, and has also been kind of back in the public eye recently, to where, again, maybe she'd be in consideration. Yeah, I just feel like as a whole, I don't expect them to actually look at Nellie Bolton as a legend of Survivor, to where they would pick her over just going for a more recent casual fan favorite, to where, again, I don't think she makes the cut. Next up for Gabon, to where straight up, I don't think a single person's in consideration for a legend season from Gabon. So with that, let's move on to Tocantins, where we got a bit more to consider. I mean, obviously we got JT, obviously the winner of the season, and that I was shocked to see be brought back for Game Changers over the likes of Mike Holloway, where obviously he seemed to be in favor of production at that point. However, it seems like since then that favor has kind of slipped, where, I mean, there was some post-game rumors about him, and even then, again, we know that he wasn't contacted for 40, to where, again, I think he's probably out of it at this point, to where if it were not for that, I think he definitely would be in consideration here. Yeah, again, he didn't make my cuts. I think Steven would also probably be considered, though I think he would more likely say no, and really he's been very open since Cambodia that he has no interest in playing again, so again, I think it's a pretty easy no there. Also consider Tyson. However, Tyson's been in this weird spot where up to 40, he had constantly talked about how he would always go to play Survivor because he essentially looks at it as his job and seems so willing to just play again. However, since 40, and since also starting his podcast, he's seemingly a lot more reluctant to play again, talking about how he's retired. However, I do think out of the big legends that say that they're retired, I think he's probably one of the more likely people to unretire himself. Yeah, again, I think for the sake of this cast, I think he's probably likely to say no. And again, considering how competitive the cast is for white men, I did feel like, again, considering he more than likely will say no, it's just not even worth it to bother putting him on the cast. However, the person I did put on the cast from Tocantins ends up being Coach. To where, again, I think Coach is definitely in the conversation. I think Coach is someone that I think I would even like consider for the proper 50 that's coming up, to where even outside of the legend theme, to where, again, Coach is obviously a legend of the show, someone that production loved at the time, to where while he hasn't been on the show in a while and has, again, conflicting messages on whether he would play again or not, I feel pretty confident in the fact that if they called him, he would say yes, to where, again, I felt like of the Tocantins people here, I thought he was the most likely to be brought back. Next up for Samoa, and I mean, for Samoa, Samoa, I think there's only one real consideration. It's Russell Hantz, though it's also Russell Hantz. Where again, I don't think he makes it on. I mean, Jeff has openly said that they would not cast Russell Hantz in the modern day. So again, don't think he's on it. Next, for Nicaragua, I mean, no one's really in consideration here. The only possible person would be Fabio. However, again, Fabio wasn't on 40, so I doubt he would be in consideration for 50. To where while Jeff seemingly loved Fabio at the time, I just don't think that opinion's really stuck around to where yet Fabio doesn't make it on. Next up, Redemption Island. I mean, got a couple considerations. Neither of them made the cut for me, though. I mean, Philip is someone that I think would be in the conversation. I think they would definitely be interested in putting Philip back on the show. However, I think Philip himself has no real interest in it. So again, don't think he makes it on. I think the other consideration would be Andrea. However, I think Andrea probably just doesn't make the cut. I mean, while she is someone that production does seemingly very much like, I do feel like at the end of the day, as something to mention here is that in comparison to there being a lot of white men that are likely for this cast, there's also a lot of POC women that are likely for this cast, where the white women slots are also pretty limited, because that Andrea doesn't end up making my cut. Next up for South Pacific, I think there's two main people to talk about here. I think Cochran is someone that they would very much want, I think almost guaranteedly says no. Again, he said no to Winners at War. I don't know why he would say yes to a season like this that's even on lesser of a scale, but I think someone that would be more in consideration would be Sophie Clark. However, I also decided to not put her on the cast, where she would definitely be in the conversation. I think she would be someone that had all the puzzle pieces been laid out perfectly. I think she's someone that could have found a slot on the cast, just how all the other slots end up playing out, there just wasn't really a slot for her by the end of it. Next up, going on to One World, where kind of a similar-ish thing for Kim, to where, again, Kim would definitely be in consideration. I don't know if Kim would actually say yes, though, so even that is a question mark, where I feel more confident that Sophie would say yes, but even then, I don't think Kim is someone that is that high on their radars anymore, to where, while again, I think she would be in consideration. I think had the cast been laid out in a specific way, maybe she makes it on. Again, I just feel like considering the combination I picked, she didn't make it on. But next up for Philippines, and here we have two major considerations. Two people that have been mentioned a lot in recent Survivor, that being Malcolm and Denise, with Denise being someone that I very much considered, where, I mean, she's obviously been someone mentioned on the show constantly in recent years. I do feel like her Winners at War appearance was something that probably would turn them off, you would think. I would suspect that they weren't particularly happy with how she kind of petered out towards the end, and even then, I don't know if Denise would want to play again. So again, didn't keep her on. However, the person I did put on is Malcolm. And again, Malcolm's someone that it's been a while at this point. I mean, again, by the time Survivor 50, it had been 16 seasons since Game Changers, which is pretty insane. I think he's someone that's still in the casting pool. And again, I think would also be in the conversation for the real 50. I also feel like he's probably someone that I'm not even that solidified on what production actually thinks about him anymore, where you really don't hear production talk about Malcolm anymore outside of his connection to Denise, where while he is constantly referenced because of that dynamic, I feel like Malcolm himself hasn't really been top of mind for production in a while yet. Again, I think for a Legends cast, I feel like he is someone that is very likely to say yes, even though that's not a guarantee, but also someone that, again, I think would fit the cast like this, would be, again, qualified enough to be a legend. So again, he made my cut. Next up for Karamoan, and with that, we can move on to Blood vs. Water, where I do think there are definitely some considerations in Blood vs. Water. I think you have some decently sized names from the Love One side of things. And again, you got Hayden, who is someone that is shocking that he's never played Survivor again, yet from what I understand, he's turned down previous seasons. It doesn't seem to have an interest in playing Survivor again at this point, to where, again, I don't think he makes it on. Also, I was pretty close to putting Sierra on the cast, where while, again, production has not talked about Sierra in a while, I would expect her to be in the conversation here. And again, she's someone that qualifies as a legend, yet again, I don't think makes the final cuts. And also, I would very much consider Brad Culpepper, who, again, also doesn't really fit on the cast. I think there's just not enough slots, and even then, I think Brad Culpepper likely says no, along the fact that, again, it's also, like, decently enough removed from him to where I don't know if he's, like, super top of mind. So, again, he didn't make the cut. Next up for Survivor, Cagayan, and I shockingly put nobody from Cagayan on the cast. Now, obviously, a big consideration is Tony, and Tony is someone that obviously would be a big legend for the show, two-time winner, massive character, and I don't think it's necessarily a spot where Tony would say no. Yet, I also feel like just Tony doesn't need to be on 50. Straight up, would production put him on? Like, maybe. But for me personally, I just feel like his inclusion's not really necessary here. I don't think it would go particularly well, and considering he just recently wanted another show, and who knows if he would want to do another show so quickly afterwards, where, again, I just think as a whole, while Tony could definitely be in consideration here, I think considering the limited casting spots, and how, again, I feel like I don't need to personally see Tony on Survivor again, I decided to leave him off. Other considerations here, I mean, you got someone like Cass, who I think would definitely be in the conversation, massive character, I don't know if she would say yes, but again, I don't think she makes the cut. Spencer, someone that I think if this was Survivor 40, I think he probably makes the cut, considering he seemed to be in favor of production at that point. I don't know where he is now. Obviously, his recent activity has been very questionable, where, again, who knows where production is on him now, but I just decided to leave him off. Obviously, you also got to consider Sarah Lucina, who, I guess, no one that, could theoretically make the cast. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that Sarah says yes. I don't think it's out of the possibility that production does put her on. Yeah, I also feel like, again, I don't need her on. And, again, considering the breakdown of the cast and thinking about diversity mandate, I just don't feel like she's necessary here, so I decided to leave her off. Next up for Survivor San Juan del Sur, and here we do got a big three here. Three pretty big icons from the season at this point. We got Natalie Anderson, Kelly Wentworth, and Jeremy, and I put one of these people on the cast. The only one of these three that seems to want to play again, where, again, Jeremy is someone that very openly doesn't want to play again. To where, while I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility they could coerce him back if they really made accommodations for him, I really just don't feel like he has much incentive to play again. And I think similar thing with Kelly Wentworth. I don't think she has much interest in playing Survivor US again. Where I also feel like she would probably decline. Where, again, the person that makes it on is Natalie Anderson. And again, Natalie seems to still want to play Survivor again. After 40, she was very high on the idea. Again, who knows, considering it's been a decent amount of time since then. But again, I would still expect her to want to play Survivor again. And I feel like, considering her current status in the community, I feel like it's a pretty easy pick here. Next up for Worlds Apart, and there are three major considerations here. None of them made the cut. Obviously, Joe Anglim is someone to talk about. Hopefully, he wouldn't make the cut. Again, who knows with Survivor production? But again, I'm putting faith in them to not cast him. So again, he didn't make it on. Carolyn is someone that production openly loved at the time and talked about after Game Changers that next returnee season, Carolyn Rivera is going to be on. And again, that obviously didn't happen. So again, who knows? Probably not though. It's for Legend season in particular. And the last person I considered was Mike Holloway, the winner. Yeah, again, considering he was on 40, I don't know if he would make the cut for this, so again, he didn't make it on either. Next up for Kaoh Rong, and here we have a decent amount of contenders for Kaoh Rong. Yeah, only one person here made the cut. Also, not the person I was expecting to make the cut coming into this. Where obviously, Debbie is someone that appeared twice, and even got a recent mention on the show. I think she would at least be in the conversation, though I don't think she would make the cut. Sydney is someone that they were trying to get back for a little bit, yet she would say no, to where, again, who knows if she would say yes now, but again, I don't know if she quite makes the cut as a legend. The bigger names here, though, I didn't put Ty on the cast, who, again, I think would be very much in the conversation. I think he would be pretty close to making the final cut, to where he was pretty much the last POC guy that I ended up cutting for the cast. Someone that would definitely be in the conversation to be on. Also, I did consider Aubrey, who didn't make it on the cast, who is a bit of a question mark nowadays. So again, she had a pretty rough experience on Edge of Extinction. Yeah, it's also been years since then. I think she's in a different place in her life, to where, again, who knows if she would say yes now, but again, I decided to just leave her off. The person I did put on the cast, though, ends up being Michelle Fitzgerald. Now, the big qualm with Michelle Fitzgerald is the fact that would she say yes, considering how busy she is with the challenge? But again, considering the fact that she constantly says yes to the challenge, also makes it very clear the fact that she is very into the idea of being on reality TV again, and along with the fact that this is obviously a much bigger prize than the challenge is, I would expect her to prioritize Survivor over the challenge if given the offer, to where, again, I think she would probably make the cut. I think she would probably say yes, and I think production for a Legend season would probably consider her, so again, I think she made the cut. Next up from Legend X, no one made the cut here, yet there are some considerations. Adam is someone that I would have said would have been in the conversation had it not been for the recent controversy with Jeff being upset at him for him being a casting coach, to where, again, don't think he makes it on at that point. David Wright is someone I would consider. Yeah, I don't feel like he would probably say yes. I don't think he's someone that is dying to play Survivor again. Also, I would consider Jay, who I think would very likely say yes. Yeah, I don't know if he would quite make it onto this cast, where, again, considering the Legends moniker, that I don't think he really is one, and the fact that he's so far back at this point, I just don't think he makes it on. I also would have very much considered Zeke. Yeah, one, I don't think Zeke would say yes, but also, again, considering the fact that he might not be loved by production anymore, based on some recent events, to where, again, didn't put him on. And also, I did consider Michaela, who, again, a little bit questionable of a legend, yet still had a pretty big impact over the course of 2 seasons, where, again, I think she would be in the conversation. Yeah, I don't think she'll make the cut. Next up, moving on to HHH, and I didn't put anyone from HHH on, yet there were some considerations. Obviously, Ben is someone that I think production would want for this cast. I think production is still pretty high on Ben. Again, Jeff came out of Winners at War, talking about how Ben is on his Mount Rushmore, which is still an insane comment to make. Again, I think they would want Ben. I think Ben is likely to say no. I don't think it's impossible that he says yes, but I do think he came out of Winners at War being kind of down on playing Survivor again, to where, again, I would just expect him to say no. The other consideration would be Chrissy. It was obviously a massive name at the time. I do think as time goes on, though, I do think she's becoming more and more forgotten about by Survivor production. And again, I think considering the decent gap the last time she played and her not being legendary enough in my mind to make this cast, again, I end up leaving her off. And next up, we're going on to Ghost Island, where I did put one person from this cast. Now, the main considerations here were Donathan, someone that production seemed to love at the time. Though, again, is he legendary enough? Not for me. So, again, I left him off. But obviously, you gotta consider Dominic and Wendell, to where I did not put Wendell on. I did consider it. I do think Wendell is someone that has, again, been on and off on whether or not he would play Survivor again. I do lean towards him saying yes, considering how involved he is in the community, whether for better or worse, and how he's accepted other reality shows. So again, I think he would probably say yes. However, again, I think it's questionable if he makes the cut. The person I did put on the cast, though, is Dominic. And again, Dominic is someone that, despite him only playing one time, I would consider him a legend. Dominic has only played one time. I do think he's someone that, again, you could argue is a legend. Obviously, the closest a non-winner had come to winning the game. Now, again, I think it's a little bit hazy on if production is still looking at Dominic for a returning chance, to where, again, we'll see what happens on 50. Yeah, again, I'm a bit unsure on where he lands. Yeah, I think for a legend season, if you're trying to bring up a justification for casting someone as a legend, I feel like Dominic has that justification more so than most other recent people that they would want to cast from, to where, again, I think there will be a decent amount of recent people, as we'll talk about. Yeah, I feel like Dominic is probably the most justified of those people, so for me, he ended up making the cut. Next up, for David versus Goliath, and again, I think there's two main considerations. Both of them made my cut, to where obviously Nick is someone that I don't think they would want back. People like Davey and Gabby are people that I would personally like to see back. Yeah, I don't think are really legendary figures. The people I do think they would bring back, though, from David vs. Goliath at this point are, again, two people I am very much eyeing for the actual 50. The first person is Christian. And again, is Christian a legend? Debatable. I do think he's a big character and someone that production very much likes, someone that was a big casual fan favorite at the time. I think he is definitely someone that, again, has a legendary reputation. I don't know if I would classify him as a legend. Yeah, I feel like for a cast like this, I think they would want Christian to begin with. I think they would consider him good enough to be on this cast. He makes it on. The other one I'm a bit more questionable on, where, well, again, I think this person's debatably a legendary figure. I do question if production would look at them as that. However, I did also put on Angelina. And again, I think Angelina probably has one of the greatest, like, single seasons from a character point of view. And she's someone that was, again, a high-profile name at the time. I mean, Jeff openly said that if there was one person that he would be able to bring back from David vs. Goliath, that person would be Angelina. Now, again, as time goes on, I think someone like Christian has stuck out in their minds a bit more than Angelina. However, I do think Angelina is still in the conversation. To where, again, considering she's probably just naturally going to be in the conversation for 50 to begin with, I do think there is a world where they just say screw it and put her on a season that is going to be labeled legends. Despite the fact that, again, I think it's questionable if she's a legend or not, but I do think for a cast like this, I think she's good enough to make the final cut. Next up, moving on to Edge of Extinction, and there's two main considerations from this cast. I think you got the winner, and Chris Underwood, who I think would be in the conversation. Now, would Chris want to play again? I think it's a little bit questionable. I could see a world where he says yes. I could see a world where he says no. And like at the end of the day, I didn't put him on mostly because, again, I just don't feel like Chris was really the most dynamic TV, to where I don't know if they're dying to see Chris Underwood play Survivor again, to where while I do think they hold him in pretty high regard, especially in terms of him coming back from the edge and winning after that, and then him also taking down Rick Devens and fired, I think would, again, have him held up to this legendary status from a production point of view. I just feel like with a casting pool this tight, I don't think he makes the cut. However, the person that does make the cut is obviously Rick Devens. And yeah, Rick Devens is a lock for 50. I would be mind blown if Rick Devens is not on 50, to where, again, you could qualm if he's a legend or not. I do think he is someone that, again, has a big enough legacy to where it makes a lot of sense for him to be on a cast like this, especially when, again, they're already going to put him on 50 no matter what the theme actually is anyway. Next up for IOI, and I mean, really, I don't think anyone from IOI is in consideration for a legend season. While I do think there are people like Elaine, people like maybe a Lauren Ashley Beck that could be in the conversation for the real 50. I don't think anyone would make it on under a legend sort of theme. So again, no one made the cut. And with that, we're now moving on to the new era, where we do get almost a third of the cast from the new era. Because again, if they do a legend season, they would definitely put very recent people on, despite it not fully making sense. But with that, we're starting it off with Survivor 41, which straight up, I don't think anyone makes it on. And I'll be honest, like on the actual 50, I do question if anyone from 41 will just make the cut anyway. So obviously the big contenders here are Shannon and Ricard. I think those are two people that you can at least argue the fact of them being a legend. But again, I don't think either of them make the cut. For all I think Shan is someone that, again, could potentially come back, but also potentially not come back. I don't think she's in the conversation. I think Ricard's probably just outright forgotten about at this point. The other person to consider is Xander. However, I also feel like Xander's kind of overshadowed over time. I think he's someone that just simply would not make the cut on a modern returnee season. And also, even then, the moniker of legend would be questionable. So again, he didn't make it on. However, I did put people from 42 on the cast. 2 people, actually. Now, the people I considered but did not put on was Drea, who, again, questionable as a legend, yet production very much liked Drea at the time, and straight up, Drea was on my initial draft of this list. However, ended up being bumped for a certain other person, to where, again, I think Drea is someone that production very clearly likes, and I could see them shoehorning her into a legend season, yet I decided she didn't make the cut. And the same thing goes with Omer as well. Now, the people I did put on here, the first one might be a bit questionable. That person is Jonathan. Now, I will say, there was definitely a point where I was thinking Jonathan's like a 100% absolute lock on 50. I do think that has kind of waned over time. So while I do think he's still very likely to be on, I do think he's not as big of a lock as he used to be. And I think considering also, again, the tough competitive field for white men in particular, I do feel like Jonathan might barely squeeze on the cast here. Yeah, again, the question is he a legend or not? I think they would consider him a legend. I think they would largely talk about how much of a physical beast he was in the challenges, to where I do think they would quantify him as one, especially on a cast that is very much missing this like big physical competitor. I do feel like Jonathan ends up making the final cut here, and the other person's, again, pretty much a shoe-in on 50 if they do have winners on, and if she says yes, and that person's Marianne. Again, Marianne's a lock if she wants it. I think she's very likely, considering any theme that involves winners, to where, again, for a legend season here, again, I think any winner would quantify enough to be a legend of the show, to where, again, Marianne's just a very easy pick for this cast. Next up for 43, and here I put one person from the cast, so I will say this is also one that I'm a bit hazy on, where I think the true contenders from this cast are really the 3 that production loved that got taken out towards the end. You got Cody, Carla, and Jesse. All of them I think would be in the conversation under normal pretenses without the Legends moniker. I think with the Legends moniker, I do think it becomes a lot more tough. I think it's tough to really argue Carla and Cody being legends of the game. The person I put on here is Jesse, which again, even then, like, is he a legend? Questionable, but I think he's someone that clearly production does look at as a really strong player, someone that I think they clearly look at as the best player of the season, to where, again, I think that would at least put him in the conversation here, to where I will say, I do think as time goes on, like Jonathan, I do question Jesse's returning chances as well, to where while I think he was a lock at the time, I do think as time goes on, I do wonder, is he going to make the final cut? Yeah, again, considering him being one of the bigger names of recent Survivor, especially from a game standpoint, I did feel like he still qualified enough to be on the legend cast. And next up, we're moving on to 44. And obviously, I think the 3 big people to consider here are the Tika 3. I think all 3 of them would very much be in consideration. The question is, would all 3 make the cut? And I decided no. To be honest, I think there is a world where they would say yes to all 3. I do think they want all 3 of them back. The question is, would all 3 say yes? And would all 3 make the cut considering all the limitations on the cast? And straight up, Carson did not make the cast. Now, again, despite the controversies around Carson, I do think production wants Carson back. I think he is likely to be on 50 in its current state. However, again, I think there's at least more of a world where he says no, just due to him being busy with schooling and NASA. But again, I think he would be in the conversation. I think he would want to play again. However, again, I think when we have a cast that already has like Rick Devens, that has Christian, I think are probably more legendary figures. I just feel like for me personally, I think Carson just doesn't make the cut. However, I did put both of the other 2. I think Carolyn, again, is a lock for 50 if she wants it. Which again, considering the fact that she's already doing other reality shows, I think she is very likely to want to do 50. To where while you can can question, is she a legend? I do feel like, again, for a modern Survivor player that isn't a winner, I do think she's pretty much as legendary as they come. I do feel like Carolyn has a massive reputation in the community, and Jeff constantly talks about Carolyn all the time on Fire, multiple interviews, even on 46 in the after show they talked about Carolyn. Again, I think Carolyn is a shoo-in for this cast, so again, she was easy to make it on, and so is Jam Jam. Or again, I think Jam Jam also is a pretty big lock for 50 if it's a theme that allows winners, where again, I think production loves Jam Jam. He obviously is a massive character. He also is a recent winner, to where again, I think he's easily making it on, and with a cast labeled Legends, I think he is someone that easily fits the moniker, despite how recent of a player he is. Next up for 45, and straight up, no one from 45 or 46 was originally going to make the cast. I was actually going to limit it back to 44. However, one person from 45 did end up making the cast by the end of it. So while I do think there are definitely people from 45 they would definitely want to see back, I think it's, again, tough to argue them as legends, even though I think if Emily were to want to play again, I think she would someone that they would squeeze her on the cast. Yeah, the person I did put on here is the winner of the season. We got Dee. And again, I think Dee is someone that, while originally I did not think that production thought extremely highly of her, I remember back on the On Fire podcast when Rick Devens claimed that Dee was the best winner of the new era, that Jeff was just kind of dismissive of that thought, to where, again, it made me always question what he thought of Dee. Yeah, obviously, they picked Dee as the host of On Fire the following season, and he seemed very impressed by Dee through that run, to where, again, I think Dee probably makes it on, and again, her being a recent winner is, again, enough to be a legend of the game. I do think she is someone that, again, kind of fits the spot, to where, again, I knocked Drea off the cast for Dee. I think Dee is someone that is probably more likely to make it on, if the theme permits at this point. So again, I end up putting her on, but again, no one for 46 ends up making the cast. Obviously, there are some people that will more than likely be on 50. I think Q is obviously the person to talk about here, and I very much considered it. I do feel like it's, again, just kind of tough to fit him on the cast if you still want to keep these big legendary figures. I think you could definitely argue that he is a legendary character already in the Survivor lexicon. I just feel like, again, it's tough to really find a slot for him without taking out someone that is also a big legendary figure. I guess the person that you would potentially swap him out with is someone like Jesse. And to be fair, I could see production making that swap. Yeah, I just personally feel like Jesse, from a gameplay perspective, more so fits this cast than Q. So again, Q is an all-time great character. At least from a gameplay front, I do think Jesse is a bigger name, even though, again, I think likely they would want to try to squeeze Q on. And again, outside of that, I don't think anyone else would really fit the legendary moniker. I mean, Kenzie, potentially, if she wanted it, but she doesn't. So through that, again, no one for 46 ended up making it on. But there we go. I mean, that's every season of the show. So with that, we do have our final cast here for this Legend season. So with that, the people that did end up making the cut here are Jerry Manthe, Sandra Diaz-Twine, Stephanie LaGrossa, Sari Fields, Yul Kwan, Earl Cole, Coach Wade, Malcolm Freeberg, Nally Anderson, Michelle Fitzgerald, Dominic Abate, Angelina Keeley, Christian Hubicki, Rick Devens, Jonathan Young, Marianne Oketch, Jesse Lopez, Carolyn Weiger, Jam Jam, and Dee. To where again, that's the cast I think they would put together for Legends. While obviously there are qualms here and there, I do feel like as a whole, again, just like looking at all the pieces, keeping to the diversity mandate, trying to balance all the things that I think production would try to balance, I do feel like this is a somewhat possible group. Though again, at the end of the day, I don't think they would actually do a Legend season. I don't think that is the vibe that they're going for with 50. For a while, I do think there's definitely a chance that someone like a Sari or someone like a Malcolm or even someone like a Coach could make it on from an earlier season of the show. I do think there will be a lot more recent players on the actual cast of 50. But again, this is just an experiment here, talking about what I think a modern Legend season would look like. But with that, again, I will be continuing on the series, again, redoing some of my other casting videos in the lead up to 50. I will for sure be redoing my Second Chance casting video, along with my Heroes vs. Villains casting video. I'll also be doing my Jeff Probst Dreamcast video, though, to be fair, that's not really in correlation to 50. I think the only one that I am considering is essentially Old School versus New School, which would be transformed into Old Era versus New Era, which, again, I think would be interesting to put together. Though that's one I haven't fully locked down if I'll be releasing that before the 50 cast is put together. But either way, I mean, again, I'll be continuing on this casting series in the upcoming future, so expect more of these videos down the road. But for now, that is the video. Thank you for watching.